What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and today we're going to be doing a beginner's guide of the Jeskai Convoke deck for the standard format. It's a deck that early on I picked it as kind of the dark horse of the format. I think that it lined up very well with a lot of the other mid-range strategies just because at the time there was a lot of Dimir mid-range, there was a lot of Golgari mid-range, and I think even with the introduction of Esper Pixie and maybe some more people playing the domain decks, which I don't necessarily prefer those matchups as the Jeskai Convoke player, but I don't think they're like so bad that it is kind of giving you a reason to be off the deck. I think that there's a few different things that you can do and a few different variations that you can take on where you can have a lot of game against a lot of what the metagame is throwing at you while having some pretty good matchups and blanking some of the most important parts of the format. So today we're going to be going pretty in-depth on the Jeskai Convoke deck, so I hope you all enjoyed the video. And of course, before we get into any of that stuff, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where we talk mainly about the modern and standard formats as well as going into Pioneer and creating some other longer form videos for your viewing entertainment. So if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you would like to go even further and you want to see more content from me, I actually host a podcast with my co-host Randy over at MTG with Randy called the Casual Spikes Podcast, where we talk about whatever the current RCQ season is, go over the metagame, maybe even play some matches with some of those decks that you can expect to see at your local RCQs to hopefully get you ready for those regional championships, and of course covering any and all news related to Magic the Gathering as it sees to those formats or just important things in general. So you can go ahead and subscribe to that channel over there. We try to post an episode once a week. On top of that, I have my own Discord server. You can follow the link in the description down below to go join over there. Of course, I also have a Twitch channel over at twitch.tv/Crowday23 where when we go live and we decide to live stream, that's where we're going to be at. You can go ahead and follow over there. Lastly, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. Manatraders being a monthly subscription service on Moto where you can go and rent various different decks, even such as the ones that you see today, and play them in the Moto leagues, in Moto challenges, and even participate in the Manatrader series where you could potentially qualify for their invitational tournament in December, which they do a lot of prizes for a lot of the monthly tournaments, and even the invitational does have a really nice prize pool. So definitely worth it. If you use my code down in the description below, you get 5% off your monthly subscription. And of course, I get a little bit of kickback as well, which I do really appreciate any and all support. But I want to thank Manatraders again for being the sponsor of the channel. And let's go ahead and take a look at the Jeskai Convoke deck and definitely go through the ins and outs and kind of give you a reason to play the deck. So here we have the Jeskai Convoke deck. I kind of have it all broken down so we can kind of go through this piece by piece, because I think a lot of this is important to kind of understand some of the differences of this aggro deck versus maybe some of the other traditional aggro decks that we see in Mono Red, Gruul, and Boros. So as I kind of console my notes here, Jeskai Convoke is a deck that is more go wide than it is going tall. You see a lot from the Mono Red decks where they kind of curve out 1, 2, 3, or if you're playing like the Mice package where you want to go Emberheart Challenge, or excuse me, you want to play Heartfire Hero into Manifold Mouse, where you want to be able to have a creature that is going to end up getting bigger. It's going to get double strike, and then with things like Monstrous Rage, you're going to be able to give it a trample and just deal tons and tons of damage, and then punishing your opponent for waiting to kind of kill off this creature, because then it just explodes and ends up dealing even more damage. So that's kind of where the Mono Red decks can kind of get you in a bind. Screaming Nemesis is a very good card in this format. Just again, stopping your opponent from gaining a ton of life. We've known that a card like the Shelter by Ghost has been pretty popular and has now starting to see less play, mainly for the fact that people are also playing Nowhere to Run, which gets around ward abilities and hexproof and things like that. So definitely the ward was very solid on, putting it on a big creature. Your opponent really can't kill it very efficiently because they're going to spend their turn doing it, and especially with a deck like this, your opponents really don't have a turn if they're going to use their whole turn playing a spot removal spell when you've already kind of gone wide with the board. So this is a card that you would see it would perform very well against like those aggro decks, and also a reason why you would want to play necessarily a deck like this, because you'd be able to get out a pretty big creature early on, play a Shelter by Ghost to take their 3-drop, end up gaining a ton of life, and they'd have to spend their whole turn trying to get rid of it, and a lot of the time they really wouldn't be able to beat like the Ward 2 necessarily on Sheltered by Ghost. But that's kind of like the inherent differences that we're kind of looking at here, is that the red base aggro decks, they're going to try try to go 1-2-3 or go 1-2, play a bunch of burn spells and Monstrous Rage, kind of get through. Gruul Aggro is going to be able to do kind of the same thing, but then also protect their creatures, with the Boros decks also being a little bit more burn heavy than they are on like the protection spells. So just kind of the thing to keep in mind there. You're not really looking for, the protection spells, kind of like what we see from the Gruul deck. This deck is just trying to get a lot of value from playing very cheap, efficient creatures that are going to kind of help feed into the overall game plan. So one of the big things of this deck that you want to kind of like evaluate and look for in your opening hands is, does my hand play a Knight Errant of Eos on turn 1, or excuse me, on turn 2? Or are we setting up for a Ward in the Inner Skies? So Knight Errant of Eos is a 5-mana 4/4 Convoke creature that when it enters, you look at the top 6 cards of your library, you reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value X from among them, where X is the number of creatures that convoke Knight Errant of Eos. You put the real cards in your hand, then shuffle. So this is a way that on turn 2, with certain draws, we can just get the full value for this. We can tap 5 creatures to end up actually casting this card. And if it resolves, we have the potential to find any creature in our deck. We can find more Knight Errant of Eoses if we think we're going to play a little bit longer a game. We want to be a little bit grindier in that sort of way. Or I guess even if we don't have any other hits. And a lot of our creature curve is pretty low. So even if you don't have the ability to play a Knight Errant tapping 5 creatures, really, if you end up tapping just 3 creatures, you're going to end up hitting all the other creatures that you're going to want to actually hit besides other Knight Errant of Eoses. Ward in the Inner Sky, I would say, is definitely like plan 1B, almost to like plan B. Basically, it's definitely worse when our deck is kind of designed to play around a lot of the spot removal in the format, but Warden does kind of dodge a lot of the early interaction if you are able to kind of get to that point where, your opponent's trying to add to their board. This is like a good way that you can kind of get ahead of those people. So Warden, for 1 white mana, it's a 1/2. It has 3 or more counters on it. It has Flying and Vigilance, and you can tap 3 untapped artifact and or creatures you control to put a counter on it and scry 1. You can only activate this as a sorcery, so you're not going to be able to, like, on the end step, scry and whatever. You're going to have to do it on your turn, unfortunately. But that's not really the worst thing in the world. There's a lot of scenarios where, we can cast a Knight Errant on turn 2, but we can also end up tapping, activating Warden twice to get it up to a 3/4, allowing us to dodge things like our own, like Torch the Towers, dodging our opponent's cut downs, dodging Torch the Tower. My God, English is so hard. And Nowhere to Run as well. And being a creature that can survive those sort of things, especially when you're on the play and you're doing this on turn 2, against like the black mid-range decks, we could see something like Anoint with Affliction. We could see things like Go for the Throat. And the only thing that we really have to show for it is just getting to scry a few times to hopefully set up our draws and stuff like that. But in a lot of those cases, to even get to that point where we can activate Warden twice on turn 2 or play a Knight Errant on turn 2, a lot of it is going to hinge on us having one of our 8 1-mana creatures that are going to give us an artifact. So Novice Inspector, for 1 white mana, it's a 1/2, and when it enters, you investigate, meaning you create a clue token that says you can pay 2 mana, sacrifice it, draw a card. Spyglass Siren, you're probably pretty familiar with this. This is played in a lot of the blue mid-range decks, and really just a lot of blue decks in general. 1/1 flyer for blue mana, that when it enters, you create a map token, and of course you can pay 1, tap the map token, and a creature explores. So the key thing that these cards kind of play in is the fact that they come in, they're a creature themselves, and they create this artifact token, to which then we can abuse the card Gleeful Demolition to then destroy our own artifact, because this says that we can destroy a target artifact, and if we control that artifact, we put a 3/1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens into play. There's not really a lot of just straight up artifact destruction, so it's kind of hard to get blown out by a Gleeful Demolition, especially since the only time that you could theoretically do it is if you go to like blow up your own clue token, and for some reason you then activate to draw a card from the clue token. That's not going to work. You have to destroy the artifact to get the value from it, aka the 3 goblins. And that's kind of where this comes in, where if we play a Novice Inspector on turn 1, then we blow up the Gleeful Demolition. At worst case scenario, we can then play our second land and then use that for mana to then cast a Knight Errant, tapping our 4 creatures and our 1 land to get a Knight Errant of Eos in play. Obviously, the dream scenario is then following it up with another 1-mana creature like Scion Spyglass, Novice Inspector, or some of the, something like Mockingbird as well, to like copy Novice Inspector to then, just have another clue token in play to kind of set up other Gleeful Demolitions, things like that. I also really enjoy this Mockingbird card as well. I think it's been very good in like my testing when playing this deck. But essentially for those keeping track, with a Novice Inspector plus a Gleeful Demolition plus another 1-mana creature, that's 5 creatures. Knight Errant Evios is going to come into play on turn 2, while fully just adding to your board. That is going to put 6 creatures in play, by the end of your turn 2, making it very hard for your opponent who's looking to play something like Go for the Throw and, cut downs. Maybe they're playing Torch the Towers, things like that. They're not really going to be able to keep up all that great. On top of that, too, that's kind of the same scenario where we want Warden in the Inner Sky, where, we play this on turn 1, on turn 1, then you play like a Novice Inspector on turn 2, create the clue token, you tap the Warden, the Novice Inspector, and the clue, you get an activation, and then you use your other mana to blow up the tapped artifact to create 3 untapped goblins, which then you can activate Warden in the Inner Sky and continue to get those scries. The scry on this is very valuable because you are always kind of wanting to find your third land, because a lot of the things that you want to do in your deck cost 3 mana, and the other stuff that is more expensive, just, like Knight Errant, you can just convoke that creature out. So that's kind of the idea. That's what you're looking for in really your opening hand, how you're looking for the game to go in the early turns, and just in that way, when you're able to enact that game plan, especially when you're on the play, it's very hard for your opponents to keep up. And it makes it even harder when the cards that we're looking for are essentially these cards here. So we're looking for things like Case of the Gateway Express, which is going to act as a removal spell, really dealing 5-6 damage to a creature a lot of the time is going to get the job done, and clear the way for us to be able to attack with at least 3 or more creatures this turn, so we can solve the case and our creatures end up getting, a +1/+0 added to them, making, our board full of 1-power creatures into 2-power creatures and making them very threatening. Deface Gallery / Painter Studio, I kind of want to play more of these in my versions of the deck. I think I want to play a second one. I've even seen some playing like 3 to 4 copies in the main deck. But Painter Studio, for 3 mana, you unlock it, you can exile 2 cards from your library, and until the end of your next turn, you can play them. Not really the side that you necessarily want to be playing. The big thing here is that is another 2 mana, like Anthem-ish type of effect for your creatures, where whenever you attacking creatures you control will get +1/+0 until end of turn. Ideally, you're turning all the creatures sideways. They're all getting that +1/+0 buff, again, making those 2-power or 1-power creatures a lot more threatening at 2 power to potentially trade off with some of your opponent's creatures, or just get in so much damage that if you don't have this, like they destroy your Deface Gallery or something of that nature, they're just going to die to a board full of creatures. Arguably, the most powerful one is Imidane's Recruiter. This is, again, something that we can hit off of our own Knight Errant Evios trigger, and something that just kind of fits into our curve. After we go turn 2 Knight, we just followed up with third land. Imidane's Recruiter is going to enter. Our creatures are going to get +1/+0 and have haste until end of turn. Obviously, in like that scenario that we pointed out, where you want to play this on turn 3, them having haste doesn't really matter, except for it does affect the Imidane's Recruiter, making a 3/2 on the turn that you play it. But if you get into like later in the game where you're looking to play like a 1 or 2 mana creature and then follow it up an Imidane's Recruiter, that also will add additional damage to the board. Train the Troops also, as kind of like a side note, is definitely not something to kind of like sleep on, where it's just like, okay, well, if I'm playing this, I'm kind of in trouble. That is absolutely not the case at all. There has been plenty of times where Train the Troops has been very good at just making a bunch of 2/2 knights, and then also, potentially setting up a turn where you just go like Recruiter into Recruiter, and you just add a ton of power to the board and be able to swing for the fences and kind of close out those really close games where, again, you got to the point where you played your 5th land, and now Train the Troops is actually looking like an enticing option, because the Recruiter is just going to sit there and waiting until you can slam it on the table and either kill your opponent or put them very close to dead. And that's basically the way that we're like abusing making a lot of these like 1-power creatures, between Gleeful Demolition and Siren Spyglass, or Spyglass Siren. Some of the other kind of like flexible-ish cards in here, or like cards that kind of help with our game plan, are going to be cards like Resolute Reinforcements, where on turn 2, we can play this card. It has flash, so we can even play it on our opponent's turn if we need to. Although I would say if your opponent knows that you're on Jeskai Convoke, it's pretty hard telegraph that this is going to be a Resolute Reinforcements. But has flash. When it enters, you make a 1/1 white soldier creature token. This is also a way that like we can play Warden on turn 1, and then we can play a Resolute Reinforcements, and that allows us to activate the Warden in the Undersky. It doesn't get us past, the bargain, torch the tower, or cut downs, or things like that. But it is something that you can do, and again, it is kind of this go wide thing where you can add to the board. This also is just like a surprise way that you can play like Resolute Reinforcements and then followed up with like Imadane's Recruiter or something like that on like another turn where your opponent thought maybe they're okay, they can kind of swing out and maybe they can lead back a removal spell, and then all of a sudden Resolute Reinforcements comes down, makes a body, and then you play like another creature, play Recruiter. All of a sudden your opponent is now facing lethal where they thought they were pretty safe. Again, I think in the early turns this is pretty telegraphed, but it can get a little shadier, I would say, or maybe a little bit more disguised like as it kind of goes on later in the game. As again, like this is a way that you can just kind of, surprise, put a bunch of creatures into play and help you get closer to, flipping your Case of the Gateway Express, or even getting to activate your Warden of the Undersky as well. So definitely pretty neat there. In this list in particular, sometimes you see people playing Clockwork Percussionist, and I don't know why it's not coming up on your screen. There we go. Clockwork Percussionist plays kind of two different roles. It's another 1-mana creature that kind of helps you with Convoke things. It's also another artifact that you can play that you can blow up with your Gleeful Demolition. Clockwork Percussionist, I think, is the best of the 1-drops. I'd seen like Yoshin Soldier being played, and I've been okay with that card, but I think I like Clockwork Percussionist better. It's just a creature that has haste. It's going to be able to attack. It's going to like help you to get your Case of the Gateway Expresses to kind of flip. It's also like a haste creature that you can play when you're looking at something like Deface Studio or whatever, or Deface Gallery, rather than having to go like 1-mana thing into Recruiter to have haste. This thing already has haste, and it's going to end up being a 2-power creature. And when it dies, you exile the top card of your library, and same thing, you may play it until your next turn, which is a way that you can see even more cards. And again, you end up having just that little bit of extra value from it being an artifact that you can then blow up with your own Gleeful Demolition here to get those goblins and even get a card for it. Unfortunately, if this is your only artifact, you're not able to turn 2 a Knight Errant of Eos, because obviously you're going to go down 1 to go up 3, so it'll be kind of a ritual of sorts, but a ritual that you don't really want like in that favor. Like it's not going to be good for you in those scenarios. But those are the big things we see here. Not really something that's like totally, I would say, fully adopted, at least I don't think it's fully adopted, is the Torch the Towers. This is a build from Ross Merriam, who plays a lot of the Jeskai Convoke deck and is a very, very, very good resource if you want to learn even more about this deck. But Torch the Tower seems like a very interesting option, I think, with a lot of the aggro decks, maybe seeing a little bit more play, and of course the Esper Pixie decks. I kind of like Torch the Tower as like an option to, kill those creatures. They end up getting exiled instead of going to the graveyard. So for a lot of the Pixie decks that maybe run like the Cadaver's Lab stuff, where they try to like rebuy their creature from their graveyard and then make a 2/2 zombie and then play the creature to go pick it up the Cadaver's Lab and kind of, set this over and over again. I think Torch the Tower does a really good job of just getting rid of them, so your opponent doesn't even have the ability to necessarily loop those creatures. Same thing with the aggro decks. If you're able to kill an early Heartfire hero, then it's not going to trigger, meaning that you're not going to end up taking a bunch of damage to the face. Again, you have to commit pretty early to doing that sort of thing with Torch the Tower, because it's only going to be able to deal 3 damage, but maybe with a combination of a Torch Tower plus a block, you're able to kill the creature and kind of deal with it in that way pretty easily. And of course, the Scry is kind of nice there too, because you do have some artifact and tokens kind of lying around a lot of the time here. Shelter by Ghost is another card that we talked about in the very beginning, and apparently Clockwork Percussionist wants to steal the show. Shelter by Ghost is another card that, at one point was like seen as like 3 copies in the main deck and then 1 in the sideboard. In this list that Ross was playing, he had 1 in the main, 2 in the sideboard. This is a really good card against the aggro decks in the format, but with kind of the Nowhere to Run specifically being adopted by some of the Dimir decks, Dimir midrange, of course the Dimir enchantment decks, the Esper Pixie decks. This card definitely gets a little bit worse because the benefit of it, like having +1/+1 lifelink, is, whatever against those mid-range decks. You're probably going to end up playing a longer game anyway, so the life gain really isn't going to matter, except for maybe giving you 1 or 2 extra turns for, in games that especially go long if you put it on a creature that really matters. Getting to take one of their things also kind of doesn't matter. I mean, it is good, but when they can just circumvent the ward cost and they're not really paying too much for it, or they're able to use their Nowhere to Run to kill a creature, and then things like the Go for the Throats are just able to kill the Shelter by Ghost creature anyway, they're going to get back their card. It's just a lot of tempo that you lose when you just lose your Shelter by Ghost. So I don't know if playing 1 copy is correct, if you need to be playing at least 2 to kind of respect a lot of the aggro players. But this is a card that does kind of lose a little bit of stock with Nowhere to Run being pretty prevalent in the current metagame. Another card that I talked about really in the beginning that I really like is this Mockingbird, and the bunny is getting very upset. Funny that Bunnycorn actually was released in Wilds of Eldraine, and then we have Bloomburrow that just gave us all these cute woodland creatures. But Mockingbird has been surprisingly good. Not only in the fact that you can just copy a lot of your creatures, and for those of you that maybe don't know, Mockingbird just says that it enters a copy of any creature on the battlefield with mana value less than or equal to the amount of mana spent to cast Mockingbird, except it's a bird, in addition to its other types, and it has flying. So this can copy your opponent's creatures. The blue mana is included in the cost, so you can pay X is 0, and you can have it enter and play as a 1 mana creature. So X just basically leaves you flexible to, like, I can pay like 6 total mana, 5 into X, and then I can copy up to a 6 cost creature, which is really neat. But I've been in some scenarios playing this deck where I've played against like Dimir, and I've decided to copy like their Shieldred and just really punish them from being able to kind of do the thing they want to do with Shieldred, where they're playing their Enduring Curiosity, they're attacking with a bunch of these small creatures, and they're getting to draw a bunch of cards and gain a ton of life, and kind of make racing situations awkward. There's times where you're able to just kind of copy their Shieldred and then kill their Shieldred with something like a Case of the Gateway Express, or some combination of like Torch the Towers, and just kind of get it off the board. But then you also have a Shieldred still in play, meaning that it gets very hard for them to want to attack until they can actually remove the Shieldred from play. And a lot of those games where they're just kind of focusing on getting rid of something like a Knight Errant of Eos and kind of just protecting their board as much as possible to not die to an Immodange Recruiter, and then the ensuing follow-up attack if you end up having some other, another Immodange Recruiter or a Deface Gallery to kind of do that sort of thing. Mockingbird just is a nice versatile card that can copy some of your opponent's things and disrupt them depending on what deck they're playing, on top of just getting to copy your things, which you're pretty fine with doing so, I would say, especially just getting extra value from things like Resolute Reinforcements, or even getting to copy an Immodange Recruiter with a Mockingbird that you already have, getting to copy an Immodange Recruiter that's already in play with a Mockingbird, essentially giving you more copies of creatures that are already in play, which I think works out in Mockingbird's favor as a card that you kind of want to see a little bit more from this deck. I think 2 copies is probably perfect. I had Regal Bunnycorn pulled out as well, because there was a version of this deck that I was playing, and Bunnycorn is now gone. Cool. But Bunnycorn was a card that I really liked for the fact that it was just a really big creature. And yeah, it was pretty bad if your opponent was playing, essentially Golgori or Dimir. But if they were trying to play any of the red-based aggro decks, this was just a really big creature that they had a very, 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 very hard time attacking through. And if you put a Shelter by Ghosts on this, as long as you keep a Screaming Nemesis off the board, you're going to absolutely run away with the game, because you were going to be gaining life in like 7, 8, 9, point chunks, meaning that it was going to be very hard for Mono Red to kind of beat you from that point. Obviously, very possible, but, when this creature is still getting to continually hang around and do its thing, it ends up being very annoying for a lot of people to deal with. So I just wanted to kind of talk about it briefly. I don't think it's necessarily good right now, Maybe it could get a little bit better if we see a little bit less of the mid-range decks and we see maybe more of some of these other pixie decks, but even just having this thing bounce when, you know, it's holding a Shelter by Ghosts on it isn't really attractive. You know, we definitely have to see a lot more aggro kind of be in the format, I think, for Regal Bunnycorn to be a relatively good option. It's not necessarily bad, I would say, against the mid-range decks. It's just worse when your opponents are able to, you know, play very efficient removal to get rid of it because it is a big creature. I played against a Golgori player, and this sat on the battlefield, and it was just completely blanked all of their creatures. Like, they couldn't attack. And eventually I could just like put them into the abyss with enough creatures and just say like, okay, if you want to, you know, stop me from going wide, I have like a bunch of 2-power creatures attacking, but I also have this big creature that, you know, if you want to block all my small creatures, this one's going to connect and deal tons of damage while also just, again, putting them in an awkward situation. So it can be good. I don't know if it's necessarily good now, but definitely something to kind of keep in mind when, you know, if you decide to pick up this deck and play it. So that's kind of what the main deck of this deck has going on. The lands are nothing really special going on. You have a lot of Spirebluff Canal. I think a playset of every single fast land that's in the format. So Inspiring Vantage, Seacrum Coast, and Spirebluff Canal. You have 4 Battlefield Forge. You have 3 Atakar Waste, 2 Shivan Reef, and 1 Basic Plains as your lands. There's some that were playing Mirex, and there's kind of a neat way where you could make like an artifact creature token that you probably weren't going to toxic your opponent out, but it was a land that you could just end up making creature tokens with, and it would kind of give you a target for Gleeful Demolition if you wanted to blow up that 1/1 to get more creatures and kind of spread out your board even more to kind of power up those Imidane Recruiters, Case, and Deface Galleries, opting instead for a Plains and then just another actual like source of colored mana that is going to continue producing colored mana past the first turn of the game. There's only been a few times where Mirex has been awkward for me, so I wouldn't be necessarily surprised if Mirex was just a card that you should be playing in your mana base, but nonetheless, it's been kind of okay. Like, I've been fine with like not playing it. The sideboard, I think there's definitely a few must-haves in the sideboard here. I think 3 to 4 copies of Protecting Negotiators is absolutely a must. This one playing 3, I almost like just playing 4. I think it's just such a good tempo card, and a lot of times where, you know, we talked about the Resolute Reinforcements ends up kind of being an awkward card or more of a telegraph card because like you're just passing with 2 mana open. Your opponent, if they're aware of what you're doing, knows that that's more than likely what you're going to end up playing at the end of the turn. Doesn't necessarily change too much because it's not like it's a super powerful spell, but they kind of know it's coming. And I think by now people know that Protecting Negotiators is in the sideboard for a deck like this. And it gets very hard to kind of play around it. This is essentially here to protect you against the decks that are going to be playing these board wipes. So people are going to be playing Gix's Command, people are going to be playing, you know, really any sort of board wipes, you know, that we see from a lot of the black mid-range decks. And this is a card, too, that has some further upside that for 3 mana, you know, you can kick it, and you can end up making a 1/1 soldier token to then help, you know, make them pay 1 more mana to, like, counter the things that you have going on. And, of course, adding another creature to your board, which means that, you know, potential Deface Galleries and Imidane Recruiters are going to be awesome. Another card that I really like in the sideboard here is Destroy Evil. This is a card that, you know, it's just very flexible. Destroy creature to a toughness 4 or greater, or destroy target enchantment. This is pretty good against the various like Overlord, like up the Beanstalk decks that we see. You know, we see a Domain Control seeing a lot more play. There's like these Caretaker's Talents decks. I think Destroy Evil is just a very solid card to be playing in those decks to kind of stop them from getting their value from a lot of their enchantment engines. And of course, like a lot of other big creatures are very annoying, not necessarily for this deck because you can kind of go wide and they don't really have lifelink, but you don't want necessarily like the White Overlord to continue to put a bunch of bodies into play, making it very hard for you to kind of gain any momentum, you know, when they're able to attack with a 6/6 and maybe you're not necessarily forced to block, but it makes another 2/1 and they're kind of fine with trading those off. You're not really getting up to like 3 toughness to survive any of those creatures anyway, so it's just a very annoying card to deal with. Destroy Evil does a very good job of once your opponent impends it, you're just able to destroy it, get it out of here. Definitely able to take care of like Caretaker's Talent, taking care of anything really from the up the beanstalk players. Just a really nice card, and sometimes a card that I've brought in against a few other like mid-range decks just to get rid of some of their other big annoying creatures to kind of clear the way. But a lot of the utility comes from just the destroy target enchantment, at least in my opinion it does. Another card I really like in the sideboard is Split Up. Split Up is, you know, a way that you can abuse some of those tap synergies that you have, where you can just like slam a Knight Errant of Eos into play and then, you know, get a few creatures off of it, and then you split up, you destroy all of your opponent's creatures, and then maybe you destroy your own Knight Errant of Eos and, you know, punish your opponent that way. If your opponent ends up getting aggressive, then you can just say, boom, I'm going to destroy all tapped creatures. You end up getting rid of their board. Maybe you slam an Immodane's Recruiter or a Deface Gallery and end up getting in tons of damage and leave your opponent picking up the pieces. I think it's a card that a lot of people maybe looked at before for the Convoke decks to kind of pick up and play, because again, for that kind of scenario where you can play a Knight, or you can even play a Warden of the Inner Sky and just start tapping all of your things to get a bunch of scries, maybe get into attack with it, and then able to tap itself in second main phase to be able to get in some damage, while then also protecting it from the split up as well is really nice. I talked about earlier, I think there's like 2 to 3 Deface Galleries is probably correct in this deck. I'd almost want this one to be in the main deck and play with it that way, just because I think Deface Gallery / Painter Studio is almost necessary in the post-board games especially, and I kind of like it really just in general for the fact of having the immediate power buff rather than having to wait, like case of the Gateway Express. Torch the Tower, very solid card. I was very happy with a lot of the removal that I played in this deck, and I think Torch the Tower is a very, very, very good option, because a lot of the time you're able to bargain it at really no cost to yourself, and also getting the scry and being able to kill 3 power creatures or 3 toughness creatures is pretty valuable. Shelter by Ghost probably mostly belongs on the sideboard. I'm really do like Shelter by Ghost, especially if people are going to be playing a lot more aggro decks. This is a card that I'll probably be shifting more to the sideboard than in the main deck, and opting for things like Mockingbird and maybe even the Bunny Corn sort of thing. But I definitely like Mockingbird. Maybe it's just right to play a third Torch the Tower in like the main deck, but nonetheless, I think Shelter by Ghost is very solid. If you played like 1 to 2 copies in your main deck, I think that'd be fine. Lastly, Invasion of Gopakon was kind of an interesting card for me. This allows you to like look at your opponent's hand. You can take a card from it, and it remains exiled, and they can pay it by, you know, paying 2 more as a cost to play it. So if it ends up being a 2 mana spell, it now costs 4 mana. Having only 3 battle counters or whatever the heck it is on this card means that it's pretty easy to flip. You play this on like turn 2. There's definitely some scenarios where you can just slam something like you could slam like a Immodane's Recruiter and then just end up being able to flip this, or just attack it for 1 and then add to your board. You know, just make it really huge and, you know, get to a point where you're just going to be able to one-shot this battle before your opponent really gets anything out of it. Your creatures are going to get +1/+1 counter for each creature that attacked that turn, and you're going to want to be attacking, so you're going wide, your opponent's only killing 1-2 of your creatures, they're all getting counters, they're all getting harder to block, and then you can sacrifice to give your creatures hexproof and indestructible in a turn to kind of shelter them from a lot of the different board wipes that are in the format, a lot of them opting for the minus whatever. But if you're able to kind of get this down fast enough and get it flipped, you're able to get enough counters where your creatures aren't really going to care about it in the first place. And that is the Jeskai Convoke deck for Standard. This is, again, a pretty powerful deck if you expect a lot of spot removal in the format. If there's a lot of people trying to play Torch the Tower, even the Pixie decks, in a way, I don't think they're necessarily a good matchup for Jeskai Convoke, but I definitely don't think they're as bad as I've gathered from watching it play. A lot of what I like about this Jeskai Convoke deck is exactly that, the fact that you are able to blank a lot of the targeted removal, and your fast starts are very hard for a lot of decks to handle, because again, they cannot remove multiple creatures off the board, and just constantly attacking with a board full of 2-power creatures eventually just overwhelms your opponent, even if they have different ways of gaining life, or if they're able to like 2 for 1 or add to the board while getting rid of your creatures. It's just very hard for them to kind of interact profitably in any way with with all of this in mind. So and on top of that too, like these creatures can get aggressive themselves. Spyglass Siren is a fairly aggressive creature. Warden the Inner Sky is like a way that you can kind of go all in on one creature while also leaving your other smaller creatures back, and it also wears a Shelter by Ghost very, very well as just getting to play offense and defense, gaining more life as you go, and of course being able to get bigger and scry into lands if you're trying to hit your land drops to cast Immodange Recruiter, or just to make sure that you find spells and can add to your board as much as possible. So it's a deck that I've enjoyed playing. It's a deck that I definitely recommend. Again, if you're kind of seeing a lot of the mid-range decks, if you're seeing a lot of the aggressive decks in the format, there's definitely ways that you can tool and tailor your deck to beat those strategies. And I think kind of as we move on, yes, there are some other decks that are going a lot bigger and doing some pretty big fancy things, but I think overall just being able to do what this deck is able to do on turn 2 is going to be very, very, very good for you if you choose to play it, and you can definitely play around some of the board wipes and other things people are going to be bringing in games 2 and 3. The deck mulligans very well. I would say that there's been at least a few times where I've mulliganed to 5 and still beat my opponent. There was even a few games where I mulliganed to 5 and I still turned 2 Night Errant of Eos and essentially undid the mulligan that I ended up going down to and end up winning that game, because again, doing something like this on turn 2 when your opponent has just played a land and passed the turn is kind of hard to actually deal with and beat. So definitely some things to keep in mind. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below if you found this helpful at all in any way. Maybe there's some tips and things that I kind of missed out on covering this. A little bit of a time crunch, but I think I got a lot of what I wanted to put out there into, I get my words. They're definitely words. It's English passably, but hope you all enjoyed the video. Again, if you did, please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe, all that fun stuff helps support the channel, promote the video through the algorithm, things like that. And yeah, that's gonna do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.